Welcome to our Plus One channel. Mission is to help you learn, play, and rank up when it comes to Town Star. If you are viewing this video, you probably have committed what I like to call Town Star Seppuku, having to go and click the damn destroy your town button, ultimately destroying your masterpiece. You probably ran out of gasoline. Well, today's gonna be a video where we outline how to set up your gasoline production. It will be done in 3 phases: the funding phase, the infrastructure phase, and the passive element phase. If you wait until the end of the video, we will show you how you can set up your gasoline production so that it is done passively. You will see me start a town from beginning to end. I will stop at key moments to give a key commentary. That way you know what you need to know. So let us go ahead and jump into the computer now. We are looking at our town, and just to let you know, everybody starts with the exact same amount of money, 25,000, 40 gasoline tanks, and the same structures that you're viewing right now, such as a silo, wood house, and that fuel storage. Before we move on, I do want to share 4 tips just to get you into the right mindset of how you should be thinking about developing your town. The first one is going to be plan ahead, build a map. You want to make sure you have a general idea of where you want certain structures and at what point. Because if you don't, you're going to go through that trial and error of building your town out, and then eventually you're going to realize, oh, my gasoline production conflicts with my crops. This game actually cares about pollution. Tip 2 is decide on which end craft you're going to sell. And this is important because it goes back to tip 1 where you have to decide which structures, and you want to have something that you could sell in the beginning that's going to match your end craft. For example, if I'm selling cakes, I know cakes take a lot of sugar. I could make sugar in the beginning and sell it throughout the entire game while I develop my game. And eventually that sugar is going to go into making cakes. Tip 3 is going to be check the cost of shipment. This is important because you want to be close to a city so that you at least pay 1 to 2 gasoline tanks per shipment. Once you start going to 3 and above, it starts getting a little bit more complicated because now you actually have to make sure you're producing gasoline fast enough so that you could sell your goods at a good pace. If you don't, what's going to happen is you're going to start having issues with storage because you're not able to ship out all your goods fast enough. And tip 4 is going to be don't be afraid to hire extra hands. If you need to hire more workers, that is totally fine because some of the workers in the beginning, such as a farmer, rancher, the builder house, their wages aren't that high. So you could hire a bunch of them just to help you build out the town and fund it faster. But you do want to be cautious on the wage that you're paying every minute, because once you start adding certain structures like a refinery and a power plant, those wages start going up, and if you don't have your funding fully set up, you're slowly going to deplete your money. So now that we're done with those tips, we're going to actually go on and move into developing this town. So we're going to go ahead and start with our first phase, and that's going to be the funding phase. And just by taking a look, you could tell that I went ahead and decided to go with sugar. And that meant that I had to set up sugarcane crops in the map. You want to set up your crops by water. That way they collect that passive water, and your farms do not have to worry about watering your crops. The only job that they should have is picking your crops. And you could see that all my farmers are just walking over and they're picking up the crops. And you could see that I have 4 windmills set up. I recommend you set up about 4 or 5. You want to make sure they're spread out enough so that you could clock them in around 30 seconds. And it takes 6 sugar canes and 3 woods for the production of sugar to start. And this brings me to another point, that you eventually have to set up your own wood farms. You could see that I set up 2, and that's sufficient as of right now. But later on, you actually have to make sure you set up your own wood farms, because these trees are just spawning automatically, or it's gonna start reducing in time because your town is taking up more space and more structures, and there's a shade effect. And if you start setting up your windmills right next to certain buildings, they're gonna have a wind block effect, and that's gonna slow them down. But in the beginning, I just recommend you space them out. You're not gonna wind up using the windmills in the long run. That's totally fine. Eventually you could just sell them, and then you could start working on your end craft that you want. We are in the infrastructure phase, and this is going to be the time where we're going to set up various different structures to aid us in the gasoline production. I do want to make sure you set up oil pumps early on because we're going to be using a lot of crude oil. You want to accumulate that crude oil over time. That way it doesn't slow you down when it comes to you ramping up your gasoline production. But make sure when you set up your oil pumps, set up a worker house, because he's going to be the guy that's going to be walking around collecting your crude oil and your energy from your wind turbines. When it comes to the wind turbines, the one thing we also have to consider is that there is a wind block effect, and that means that when you have certain structures that are tall next to a wind turbine or a windmill, it's going to obstruct the wind and it's going to cause it to clock in a little bit slower. So you want to keep it a little bit more open where you decide to place your wind turbines. Now moving on, you have to set up a warehouse. You kind of want to keep it a little close to where you're going to have your gasoline production, just so that your workers don't have to walk so far to use all the energy that's going to be stored in there. Next is going to be the wind turbines. Try to keep it a little bit close to the warehouse and try to make sure that you try to clock them in at a minute per energy. That way you will only use 2 wind turbines. If you have them a little further out, that means that your workers are going to have to walk a little bit further, and you might need actually 3 or 4. And at any point, if you feel you're not getting things fast enough or you can't match your production with your shipments because of your slow gasoline production, at any point you could add more oil pumps and more worker house. Ultimately, you're probably going to end up with 1 worker house because you don't really need that many once we have everything fully set up and our production is done passively for us. So now we're going to talk a little bit about where you're going to place your structures for your gasoline production in terms of your refinery and your power plant. So I recommend you find a slot where you could set up a straight paved road using 4, and you're going to actually set up a couple ponds. So the section that's second, depending what side you're going to start on, right or left, the second spot from the end where you're going to put your refinery, above it set up the pond, and then you're going to connect a water pump. You are going to spend a little bit more for that water pump, but we're kind of circumventing the water facility because we want to collect everything passively for our gasoline production. So once you have that set up, you could attach a lumber mill, and what that's going to do, it's going to give you free water drums passively for your lumber mill. And we need the lumber mill because it's going to give us a lumber that we're going to use for the power plant, and it uses 4 woods, 2 energies, and 1 water drum, which is getting passively to generate a lumber. So now I recommend you wait a little bit and accumulate lumber until you have 10. Then go ahead and build up a little bit more cash and set up your power plant directly below the water pump. It is a requirement for you to have a water pump connected directly to your power plant. So it works out because then it just winds up helping us with our refinery, which is going to be next door. So now your refinery is going to have passive water drums and passive energy. Any structure touching a power plant is going to collect 3 energies passively. It's going to get reduced the further out you go. But what this means is that your refinery can actually generate petroleum with just needing 2 crude oils. So now, if you want to, you could kind of check out and just start playing the game and try to build the rest of the town. But now you're going to have to watch your gasoline production. You're going to have to go from petroleum to gasoline to petroleum, back and forth. I want to avoid that. I want it to be done passively. And that's what we're going to discuss a little further in the next phase, which is going to be the passive element. We're going to go ahead and break it down in terms of which raw materials you're going to use with your refineries. These are going to be used to obviously create gasoline. And to start off, you need 2 crude oils, 2 energies, and 1 water drum to create 1 petroleum. That 1 petroleum plus 6 energies and 2 water drums could then be converted into gasoline. Typically, I rather recommend that you use 2 different refineries rather than just relying on 1 refinery when you actually start things going. Finally, we're getting through the whole passive element phase, and if you made it this far, congrats. This is basically the easiest way to set up your gasoline production. It will be done passively with the exception of the crude oil, but at a certain point, your worker house, he's not going to have anything to do with his only job. Once you build out your entire town, depending on what your end craft is, he's mostly just going to be collecting crude oil for you. And you could see that I basically eliminated the wind turbines at this stage, because when you have the power plant, you can actually convert that crude oil into straight energy. So that comes in handy. It's going to save you more space, because obviously we want to save the most space. And when you have this straight line configuration of your refinery power plant, and behind it you have the power pumps, what's going to happen is that you're actually going to be able to meet everything in terms of what you need for your gasoline production, with the exception of crude oil obviously. But just to let you know, on the right side, second to last structure, the refinery, below it's a pond. But if you notice that it's actually touching two water pumps, it's touching the one on the right and the one on the left, and that's going to be the one that you actually select for the production of gasoline, because it's going to get all the energy it needs, because it's actually sandwiched between two power plants. So it has a 6 energy, it has the 2 water drums, and it just needs the petroleum. And if you go over to the refinery, he's going to have everything he needs. All he needs is the 2 crude oils, which at a certain point you probably should have. And if there's delays in terms of how fast you're producing and how fast you need to ship out, you could just add more oil pumps, and that should kind of help correct it to slow down. If you made it to the end of the video, that means that you actually set up your gasoline production, and it's being done passively. You should not be commuting Town Star Seppuku anymore. If you really needed to, you could sell that gasoline for extra cash flow. Like always, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I do read them, and it actually helps me to understand what people are struggling. At the end of the day, we are building a community, and we are building a library of content for you, so please make sure to stay tuned. More stuff is on the way.